The Proleptic Journal of a Shite-Extractor Tractor Man by Scott Waller. 10. Around 2 weeks later. I haven't had much to say recently. My world has evolved around Faye and her crew. I spend the weekend with them, and often see Faye during the week. There is everything and nothing to say. I enjoy each minute with her. She teaches me so much and so well, not least in the art of love. I think I can safely say that I am no longer a novice in that art with a real woman. It turns out to be not as complicated as I imagined, so far at least. It's about creating something between two people, sharing oneself with someone else. It's about getting to know yourself in the process, churning and stirring the pond of human existence, and waiting to see what floats to the surface. I think so, anyway. A week later. I spent the weekend with Faye and other dissidents. I think I'm adapting to their lifestyle. I play some of their group games, watch performances, and enjoy their art and music. I join in their singing. I've even tried some of their natural hallucinogens, but I kept the dose low because it was a disturbing experience for me. It's true that after a weekend of hippie-like living, I'm not unhappy to return to home comforts, Faye's absence apart. I daren't tell them that, least of all Faye. The last thing I want is to make her think that I'm not up to it, even though I suppose it hasn't entirely escaped their attention. Sometimes it seems to me that I'm putting on an act. Natural living doesn't come, well, naturally to me. I even cheat by regulating my PWE so that it can last out my stay and I don't need to evacuate in their closets. I don't know if anyone's noticed. I feel guilty about it anyway. Still, I think she's impressed by my progress. That said, I've been kidding myself if I think that my future with Faye depends on my efforts alone. Faye and her lot spend a lot of time travelling around. I hadn't put two and two together. That is, I didn't really want to put two and two together. But today, the penny dropped, and I got the news I was unconsciously dreading. Faye will be going away for a while. She often goes itinerant in the cause of dissident militancy. She says that she feels the call, and I have to respect this. I can't stay around in one place when there is so much to do, she told me. What about me? Was all I could think, but I did not protest. I remained silent. What could I do? I won't be seeing her for a few months. I'll miss her a lot. I'll just have to learn to live with it. I lived all my life with her absence before. So what difference will a few weeks make now? It would make all the difference, of course. Once you've been bitten, there's no going back. I kept wanting to hear her commit to coming back and see me. She said she was sure we would see each other again, but she couldn't say when. I shouldn't think about it. I pretended I understood perfectly well. She seemed to be satisfied by my face-saving parade of nerves. She kept asking me if I was enjoying my experience among the dissidents. I said yes, and said that it had changed me for good. I hope you'll be able to carve your own path among us, she said. Try to meet new people among the dissidents. Enjoy yourself. Find other lovers. Broaden out. You've got a lot to offer women. I smiled bashfully. Maybe you can teach me something new when I get back. She smiled at her suggestion. I wanted to reply that I wouldn't feel the need to have sex with another woman, but I knew it would have sounded hopelessly old-fashioned to her. What about men? She continued. You need to try that. I don't believe the thought had crossed my mind, so I didn't say anything. Not for the first time in conversation with Faye. I found myself wondering how I could have been so narrow in my outlook. In any case, I couldn't speak to her much, as I was crippled by the sad realization that I didn't have the hold on her that I would have liked to have had. I was foolish to dream that I could have won over someone like her. But the dream was sweet while it lasted. I begged her to come back soon. She smiled and looked at me in a slightly patronizing way. The way she first looked at me, when everything about her was absolutely new to me. Seeing that look on her face made me even sadder. I began asking if she knew roughly when she would be back. She was evasive, and I sensed that I might have been testing her patience. I had the feeling I was disappointing her. I stopped pressing the point. I didn't want to appear pathetic or make things worse. I pretended to accept the news of her departure, as something that was perfectly natural. It felt like pretending I hadn't been stabbed in the gut. The following week. I haven't written much because I've been weighed down with sorrow at the thought that Faye will soon no longer be around. It's hard to deal with. I don't think I'll be the same when she's gone. I thought she might be hiding how long she'll be away to protect me, but I think she genuinely cannot say. She says that her first commitment is to the cause, and the precise demands of the cause are impossible to predict. I pressed for an approximate estimate. All she could say was that it was a question of months. As to how many, destiny would decide. How I envied destiny her intimacy with that knowledge. The following week. After an eventful day spent partly with Faye alone and partly with her crew, the time for departure approached. I was miserable and didn't want to leave her, but the day did not only contain sadness. At one point, when the two of us were sitting together, I felt a happy warmth. I just looked at her without speaking. After a while I said, "I'm so happy being here with you that I could almost die." She gazed upwards with an air of concentration for a moment, saying nothing. Then she spoke. "I find that true joy often bears a small dose of melancholy in its train, a sort of strain to offset a limpid beauty. It's as though pure happiness would be too intense for human beings. We are not made for it. Do you understand what I mean?" "I think so," I said hesitantly, though in truth I was still groping for that understanding. "It's like an old poet sang, 'There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.'" "That makes sense." "Mankind cannot bear too much happiness," she continued. Then she looked at me. I must have looked partly confused, partly bathed in ecstatic idiocy. "You poor thing, it's all new to you, isn't it? It's so unfair how they deceive you and deprive you for their own ends. But you're free now, and I'm really happy I could be your first. Together we are fighting them in our own little way. Seeing your wide eyes beaming away with the bliss of discovery refreshes everything for me. You remind me that it is all worth it." And then she leant over to kiss me. She made me promise to spend time with the dissidents once she had left. I assented. We kissed with a passion intensified by the imminence of separation. The following week. Life has become life without Faye. I'll have to learn to live it over again. She will be busy with her activism. I have to accept it. I don't know if she can change the world, but she has certainly changed mine. I can't stop thinking about her. 3 days later. I think I'm finding it more difficult without her than I thought I would. I don't know what else is to say, really, except that it's difficult. I can't seem to concentrate on the simple things. I try to get on with it anyway. What other choice is there? 3 days later. It's still hard without her. She asked me not to try to get in touch because she will be dedicated to her activism, and I might get her into trouble if I make waves. Of course I wouldn't do anything like that, but I simply have to find out something about her movements. I will go and see the dissidents. After all, I said I might. I'll make out like it's a social call on Abe or one of the others. Somebody must know something. I mustn't appear desperate or clingy. 2 days later. I went to say hello to Abe and Itzel. They weren't there. There was Werner, who was still fidgeting with his fingers. I asked him about Faye, but he didn't know anything. There were a couple of other people I knew, like Madge, but she couldn't help me. They were very hospitable, but I didn't really feel comfortable, despite their kind invitation to participate in their dissident things. I was too preoccupied with my thoughts of Faye to really join in. I stayed around for a little while, drank tea, and listened to some amateur musicians play their music, although I felt that my presence among them was a bit zombie-like. 4 days later. I was thinking of going to the Oasis again, but I don't want to set myself up for disappointment. I might catch Niall this time. Surely he might know something. Maybe at the weekend. Around a week later. I don't know. I just haven't felt like doing much of late. I go through the motions. That's all I can speak right. I think about going back to the Oasis, but I'm pretty sure it's a waste of time. Maybe Faye will bail me. Yes, I'm being an idiot. I just need to pull myself together and wait patiently. She'll be back in her own time. I haven't charged up Dolly for a while now. I can't really be bothered with her at the moment. What about a soppy neurodrama? That could cheer me up, as long as it's not one that makes me sad like the last one. 2 days later. Did a historic neurofilm about Majaz and Rimi today. Majaz and Rimi were the iconic athletes who were constantly dueling in track and field events before Olympic-type sports went bionic. The neuroflick explains that there used to be 2 kinds of Olympic Games, the normal Games and the Paralympics. At first, the athletes of the normal Games used to be way better, but the prosthetics of Paralympic Games gradually improved to the point where they started to produce athletes that first matched the normal Olympics and then surpassed them. Rimi, the great decathlon champion, was the last able-bodied to beat a disabled with prosthetics. He became a symbol for the plucky spirit of the power of the human body unaided by biotechnology. Majaz was his great disabled rival in the mixed decathlon, that is, in those sports events where abled and disabled people competed together. He ended up overturning Rimi's reign in the decathlon. You see, the decathlon was the last Olympics to go Paralympic because you needed so many prosthetic adaptations, because there was a huge range of physical skills involved. Majaz and his sponsors ended up beating Rimi every time, and that was the turning point. From then on, people lost interest in normal Olympic-type athletics. They just looked rubbish next to the Paralympic athletes. Healthy athletes had to undergo limb amputations to keep pace, getting rid of the inferior body parts to fix on better performing prosthetic limbs, so they could, for example, run faster than they used to be able to with a normal leg. Everybody forgot about normal Olympics. Athletics became like Formula 1, where the athlete shared the glory with the technical prosthetic expert that was able to make the most impressive mechanical bionic aid. I haven't enjoyed a neurofilm for a while, but I enjoyed that one. Around a week later. I still haven't gone to the Oasis, but feel like I have to do something. I could just show up all innocent. I was just wondering how you were all getting on. I miss the nature vibe, but I would surely come across as unconvincing. I wouldn't have enough self-belief to say something like that. Around a week later. Nothing much to report. Same situation. Life after Faye. At work I'm having trouble concentrating. Apparently this has not passed unnoticed. Dennis belled me to warn me that my strap-in's performance and capacity detector readers, what Faye would call the guardians of sleep, have picked up on an anomaly. He said that he had heard a couple of managers in charge of that kind of thing talking about it. They said I wasn't performing as well as someone like me ought to be doing, and they were keeping an eye on things. I'm grateful for Dennis's friendly warning, but even that isn't spurring me into action. I feel the appropriate worry, but I don't seem to care about it in the way that I should. I can't find the energy to concentrate. 3 days later. I think that maybe if I try one more time to go to the Oasis at the weekend, things will go better for me. Yes, that's probably the best thing. If I can find the motivation to move. If I'm ready to face disappointment again. I charged up Dolly and switched her on for a bit, but I switched her off as soon as I was done. I can't bear to hear her voice these days. Around a week later. I plucked up the courage to go to the little green oasis. When I got there, things looked different. A few solid structures, like the rudimentary closets, were still standing, but there were far less temporary dwellings, and the ones that were there looked like they had recently replaced the previous camp. I looked for the slight hollow in the surface of the land where Faye's private cabin was, where she and I first made love. I couldn't find it. I saw a bunch of willow trees by the pond, but I was unable to find the place where we had our first long kiss. I began to wonder whether it had all been a dream. I looked frantically for some sort of trace from our past, a sign to authenticate what we had shared together, something to bring back the experience. I found nothing. As I was walking around the camp, I had barely registered the fact that I didn't recognize a single face among the people I passed. Some were asking if they could help me. I waved them away as politely as I could. After a while I tired myself roaming about like a lost ghost. I eventually sat down on a fallen tree trunk. An old man with a shaven crop and a long white beard came up to me. He introduced himself as Ol.
"I'll get you a fruit juice,"
he said softly with a nasal drawl. "Thank you," I said, and waited for him to come back. "I was here a few weeks ago," I said as he handed me a cup. "It's changed."
"Of course,"
he replied casually.
"There was a sweep."
"A sweep?"
"Yeah, you know, the authorities send their bully boys in. I think a handful got taken in and then released after a few days. It's the same old story. They haven't got anything on us, so they drag us in once in a while, push us around, give a few martyrs a chance to show off their bravura, and then they let us go. They make out like they're looking for something in particular, but they're just reminding us that people who have had the effrontery to reject the rules from their hearts still have to know who writes them. I guess it reassures some people up there to think that they are at least making a token effort to make our lives a bit miserable."
"So where did they all go, the people that were here before it happened?"
"Oh, they've gone on to other camps like this one, mostly scattered in the out zones. If they're anything like me, they'd have done the rounds no end of times."
"The rounds?"
"Travelled from one camp to another. They'll no doubt be back here at some point in the future, in months, years, who knows."
It took some time for me to digest all this. Nobody had told me that dissidents lived like this, or at least if they had, I wasn't listening. Finally I asked Ol the only question that really concerned me. "Do you know someone called Faye?"
"Can't say I know anyone of that name. Do you know her real name?"
"I think Faye is a real name. At least she didn't give me another one."
"Could be. Don't ask me. It just sounds like a nom de guerre."
"A what?"
"You really are a novice, aren't you? We dissidents have different usage names. Sometimes one sticks, but most often we change them, because of surveillance."
"Surveillance?"
"Yeah,
"You're probably data protected from PTPs, police tracking programs.
But once you've stepped out of the circuit, they lift that restriction. Then they can activate all the stocked dormant information from automatic surveillance systems that otherwise they don't use. This is all pretty common knowledge. You know we are being observed, right?"
"Yes. No, I mean, of course, I'm chipped like everyone else."
"Not everyone."
Here he showed me a dark scar on his arm.
"It's messy because I'm old school. I de-chip myself with very basic equipment."
I looked at him blankly, and probably a little stupidly.
"I bet your face got us done neatly so you can barely see it,"
he continued. At this I felt even more stupid than I had done up to now, for he had read my thoughts as though they'd been scribbled down over the perplexed lines of my frowning forehead before I managed to think them. Faye did have a little red patch on her arm where the chip goes. I had thought that this might have been a little reaction to the chip, but now it made more sense to think of it as a reaction to the chip's removal.
"Everyone gets de-chipped once they cross over into dissidence definitively, or at least they've got detection autonomy on their chip."
I can't remember how the rest of the one-sided conversation went, or whether my gaping mouth closed at any point. I tried all the names of Faye's group on him. He hadn't heard of anyone except Itzel and Niall, but he couldn't say where they were.
"I don't have much of a memory for names these days. Let me ask the missus."
He turned his head and yelled,
"Nancy! Nancy! Nancy!"
An old woman peered her head out of a run-down prefab tent, and hobbled over.
"I heard what you said. I ain't as deaf as a ghost,"
said Nancy.
"She's not really my missus, of course.
but we've been hanging around each other for so long now that people call us hubby and wife. It began as a joke, but then it stuck. They can yap till the crows come home for all I flare. She had an unusual way of speaking, to put it mildly. I thought about recording her on my arm chip almost as soon as I heard her, but didn't act on the thought until later. I watched both of them while Ol explained to Nancy who I was and what I was looking for. As I observed them, I couldn't help noticing how haggard they were. He, speaking in his heavy nasal drawl, was having trouble finding his words. His speech was faltering and his gestures lethargic. She, on the other hand, had jittery, puppet-like movements. She warbled shrilly, sometimes becoming almost incoherent in her mixing up of words and phrases. They were both unkempt in dress. Bodily, they looked worn, because they hadn't used any anti-aging treatment for many years, if at all. Their skin was shriveled and weak, like a moulding sack. Then the thought occurred to me, perhaps one day Faye and I might have been like that. I think that I had always hoped, in the back of my mind, that I might be able to persuade Faye to come back into conventional life, so that she could enjoy the health advantages that are denied aging outcasts. I hadn't imagined our future as anything like this couple. I observed them. This thing they had formed over the years, with affection and irritation, with tenderness and acrimony, with the warmth and the tedium of couplehood, all mixed up. Their fading bodies that were the badge of their commitment. I was torn between admiration for something pure and enchanting, and disgust for something drab and ugly. Torn between the beautiful and the banal. While Ol was nice enough to go and ask other people if they knew Faye, he left me with Nancy. I felt like she was scrutinizing me. She started asking questions about me, trying to suss me out. Then she began speaking between her questions. Even with her warble, she spoke slowly, attentively, giving equal emphasis to each syllable, and not eliding a single sound. Listening to her had an entrancing effect. I decided to record her words without her knowing it.
If I see your darkness, I'll have your guts for laughter. Don't like me bark, hey? See how me bite fares. I see dark and rough soul seas in your windows. Come to unmuddy the murky deep din of your bell. Hell, come to palm the waves. You need to switch your step as you woe about your business. What wrought you here in the cursed place?
I gave a rough summary of the story of my visits to the little green oasis.
Stands to passion, don't it? In for the fanny, in for the pounding. You want to be in your bonnet, to get the bee out of it. All Bach, no faction. Are you, by any lads, a slate cleaner of the social arse?
I am an tractor man, if that's your question.
You've got to fact the worm's eye view now. Fortune favours the scold, not the scolding outbound cold. Can't have your omelette and break it. Godspeed, and you're slippery with wasted sweat. No point in crying over spilt silk now. Off you plot, out with the mould, bring in the stew.
I had the impression that she was talking to a deeper part of myself, as though I were made of glass and she could see into the inner workings of my being. I wanted to walk away from her, but I stayed because I was drawn to her strange discourse. I needed to go on listening. Although her words were almost incoherent, she was saying something of more significance than anyone else I'd spoken to since I first met Faye. I think she had seen the way I was looking at her and all. She may have felt hurt by my gaze, by my way of looking at them. Was she teaching me a lesson by looking through me?
You were lost, and your lostness is the early squirming worm, gobbled and spat back out by the flighty bird. What is worse, the winding earth snake wriggling in the tepid dimness, or the sky hearts blaze and freeze at the brink tank? Get back to the flooring board where they pour in virtual shite and suck solid shite out. Ordeal or soft wheel. Bum deal is num deal. Your deal, I say.
She continued in this vein until Ol came back with someone who apparently knew a lot of people. This person told me that he might have met someone a long time ago, fitting the description of Faye, but he had never seen or heard of her since. He knew Kanye and enjoyed his goat's cheese, but he hadn't seen him for ages. He had once heard Niall give a fine extempore speech denouncing the upper stratum, but as to his present whereabouts, he didn't know a thing. Another person reassured me that Abe and Itzel would be back at some point. Someone else came along proclaiming that he might have run across Madge, but couldn't be sure. A couple of other people thought that they had met someone fitting my description of Werner, but no one could tell me where they were. They told me of about 10 or so dissident camps, or squats, where I might begin my search. It sounded like a hopeless quest, but I thanked them all politely. Then I made to leave. Just as I was leaving, I saw a familiar face wandering around alone in the distance. She seemed to have emerged from a wooded area. It was Histoire. My pounding heart was all set to leap out my head. So happy was I to see someone from Faye's group. I bolted towards her at lightning speed. She recognized me immediately.
Hello, Norbert. How lovely to see you.
Great to see you too, Histoire. How have you been keeping?
Just fine, just fine. I haven't seen you in such a long time.
It's been a while.
I'm afraid I've lost my fold-up bedroom. You haven't seen it anywhere, have you?
No, but I'll help you look for it if you like. As we were looking, I asked if she had seen Faye, Abe, and a bunch of other people.
Oh, yes, she replied to my elation. I've seen Faye. What a delightful, pretty creature. And Abe and Itzel, charming pair, and Madge. Can't quite recall when I last saw them. Niall, too. What a clever fellow he is. Anyway, tell me about yourself. I haven't seen you in donkey's years.
At this I was somewhat confused. Had she mistaken me for someone else? You know who I am. The E.E.
Yes, Norbert, I remember who you are. Your face catch. The E.E. Tractor Man. Please don't treat me like a dotty fool. I never forget a face, you know. I remember yours too, even though I haven't seen you for a good few years. That's not bad at my age.
As soon as I heard her say these words, a good few years, I remembered that Histoire was hopeless when it came to remembering events in time. It all got jumbled up in her head. She didn't have a problem remembering people, but she was incapable of situating them on a timeline. I kept on talking to her, not bothering to correct any of her references to the past. After a while of this, I finally asked the question that was eating away inside me. Do you know where Faye is? Please, I must find her.
My dear Norbert, I haven't the foggiest notion where I am. How do you expect me to know where anyone else is?
And with that it was clear to me that Histoire would be of no help whatsoever in my quest to locate Faye, or anyone else for that matter, in space or time. I left the little green oasis with my mind sunk in the deepest despair. Around 2 weeks later. Since my last visit to the little green oasis, I've been plodding along in a dull haze. That whole dissident thing seems a world away from me, not just because I'm not cut out for it, but because it has fallen from its pedestal in my eyes. I had thought that I was not good enough for the kind of heroic life that Faye and others lived. Now I'm not sure whether such a life is good enough for me. You might think that I've come out of the process feeling worth more than what I was, but it doesn't work like that. I feel exactly the same way about myself, only something that I had once partly believed in, even if partly by proxy, has vanished. That high compartment into which I could reach up and slip my fantasies has collapsed and lies in tatters on the ground, amid my hopes for a future with Faye. I'm performing badly on my job. I suppose my hierarchy will catch up with me, because all the remotivation stimulators are doing nothing for me. The thing is, I don't really care what they do. What do I have to lose? Some strange things must be going on in my head, because I actually found myself, without having the slightest scruple, fiddling the stat feed, so that I could give myself the excuse to become unstrapped. This wasn't a planned rebellion or anything of that sort. I just couldn't be bothered with having my head flushed with moronic ads and whatnots. I may not be able to cope with all that dissident instability and back-to-nature stuff. I'm too used to my modern comforts. But their talk about life outside the sister machine makes sense. A few months ago I would get bored and agitated if I didn't get my dose of strapping entertainment, but now I can barely face it. In fact, I feel a tinge of excitement at doing something I'm not supposed to be doing. But the excitement doesn't last, and I soon go about my work. I might have become an outright rebel for Faye, but alone, I just don't have it in me. I still haven't heard from her, needless to say. I hope nothing has happened to her. Perhaps one day, once she's done with her activism, she might yet be persuaded to come back into conventional life. Maybe we could go into the Ray Diplars and live together when I retire. Then again, perhaps she has settled in some other place. I wish I knew more. 3 days later. Still no news. I sometimes wonder if I will ever hear from her again. It's funny, I heard that old Diana Ross and the Supreme song Baby Love on the Slipnet the other day. It must have been some taste detector advert trying to associate something that it assumed I enjoyed with its product. Well, I think it's fair to say that marketing strategy backfired. Something struck me in the song that I hadn't noticed before. I had thought it was a sugary sweet, lovey-dovey song, but in fact it has a melancholy strain to it that I'd overlooked. It's like Faye said, the song's joy is rendered more intense by a hint of sorrow. I think I understand what she meant a little better now, even if I can't explain it very well. Several days later. No news from Faye. She probably doesn't want to see me anymore. I've been trying to sink into fantasy sentimental neurodramas to make sense of things, or to forget, or both. I don't have much else to report, apart from the fact that my work situation isn't getting any better. I should really do something about it. 2 days later. I think my poor performance indicators have rung warning bells because I've been assigned a new manager. It's funny, I was just beginning to make more of an effort. Perhaps things will correct themselves. Still, I need to watch out. You never know. A week later. I wouldn't dare say it at work, but my new manager is a bastard. It's a relief to speak right it. He starts shouting like a maniac whenever something isn't exactly as he expected it to be. I don't know what he's on about half the time. It makes me feel not only like I'm an idiot, which wouldn't be difficult, but like I'm totally inept. You wouldn't think that I've learnt nothing over the years. I've become so traumatized by his bawling that all he needs to do now is to look at me with that expression of volcanic anger, and my nerves get jellified. It's like walking on eggshells whenever he's around. Another guy that I sometimes talk to, Manu, feels it too, but I think if anyone's due for the high jump, it's me, because I've been so sloppy and off the ball of late. I'm trying to make up for it, and my performance levels are gradually getting back to normal. The only positive thing I can take from all this is that I've been thinking less about Faye. I still hope to receive some sort of contact from her, if only a little neuronote. But I'm learning to hope a little less intensely as each day passes. I suppose that's progress of sorts. Maybe if I keep my head down and apply myself at work, the pain of her absence will wither away,